Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Sarah Pekkanen. Sarah is the #1 New York Times bestselling co-author of 5 novels of suspense, including The Golden Couple and The Wife Between Us, and the solo author of the thriller Gone Tonight. A passionate volunteer for rescue animals, she serves as an ambassador for RRSA India and works hands-on in India to heal and vaccinate street dogs. She lives just outside of Washington, D.C. with her family. Welcome, Sarah.
I am so happy to be here. It is great to see you.
Oh my God, it's great to see you. And Sarah and I got to sort of meet finally in real life, in person, in New York that was only just a month ago at the conference that I talk a lot about on Killer Women because I love it so much, which is Thriller Fest, which is every end of May, early June in New York City. So that was so fun. Although we were just also discussing the fact that you never really get to have a full conversation because there's just so many people that you want to talk to. So here we're going to talk about Gone Tonight.
And now we get our conversation.
Now we get to talk, and we're going to talk about. I have so many questions because if those of you that can see Sarah, behind her is a whiteboard, and I love to talk about process, and Sarah is going to share some of that with us. But before I get way ahead of myself, Sarah, tell our listeners about Gone Tonight.
So Gone Tonight is the story of a mother and a daughter. The mother's 41, the daughter's 24, and they've only had each other ever since the daughter was born. And now she's grown, she's ready to fly the nest, and her mother is determined to keep her close. The daughter's determined to move away. And there's menace coming, but it's unclear if the menace is coming from one of them or from the outside.
Oh, it's a perfect way to good teaser. You're good at this.
Oh, good. This is my first time trying it out.
Well, I think you nailed it.
Awesome.
So I want to dig into the mother-daughter stuff because, of course, there is so much of it, even though, of course, this is a thriller and most of us, thank goodness, are not living this exact life. There is so much of the sort of truth of mother-daughter relationships in here. But before we get to that, I kind of wanted to ask, I always love to hear, how a story is seeded. Where does it come from? What's the origin? Can you tell us a little bit about sort of how this story formed in your brain?
Yeah, I mean, on a personal note, I've always been interested in my grandmother's story.
Yeah.
My grandmother, who died when I was in college, was a waitress. She dropped out of school in 8th grade to help support her family, and she waitressed her entire life. And when my father was born, he had a very serious medical condition, and he was told he would not live past the age of 21. And somehow this waitress with nothing to her name, living in a house she and her mechanic, also, no education beyond grade school, husband had built, found a top doctor. He did this very innovative cutting edge surgery on my father, and my father is still alive today in his 80s. So it kind of that juxtaposition of a woman who had nothing in life and who would do anything for her kid was part of my DNA, I guess. I had always known that story. And then you kind of go as a thriller writer, you start churning that through the mix and you think, all right, what do I need to do to mix this up, to make it more, palpable for viewers and to get those thrills in there? Because my grandmother was not, she had a very kind of quiet life beyond that. She was not out there, living the thriller life.
Right. Which is good. That's what we kind of want in our grandmothers, right? Well, I love that. And I think that is such a key point to this book. And I think it's such an important point for, as the Killer Women show is the idea of, and I think, of course, I think any parent would do what they have to do. But I think there is something sort of about a mother and the way she protects her child, and it becomes, there's this push pull between, Ruth and Catherine, because Ruth is the mother and Catherine is the daughter. And, Catherine, of course, you want your children to be independent and live their own lives. But if there's a threat to them, then you also are like, I would rather you be alive and trapped in this situation than have something happen to you. And so talk about that, because I think that come from, you have children, I think, don't you?
I do. I have three. I have boys. I don't have a daughter. But yeah, I mean, there's always that fear that you're balancing with, the need to let them be independent and do their own thing. And nowadays, as parents, we can do certain things, like we can share our location with our kids. We can kind of see where they are. They can, text us or call us. So that helps somewhat, but then it also brings in the dangers of, our kids having the online presence and what that opens them up to. But yeah, I mean, just I remember, when my first son was born, just this feeling of, oh my gosh, I am responsible for you. And I'm feeling this kind of love I've never felt before. And I would do anything for you. I would kill for you. I would die for you. I would do it all. And
That's
I think
right.
that feeling that we have about the people we love, I really wanted to tap into that for this book. And it was amplified because Ruth and Catherine really have nobody else in their life. The story
Right.
told Catherine is that she was disowned. She was 16. She got pregnant and her family threw her away, wanted nothing to do with her. And
Right.
as Catherine starts trying to learn more about Ruth and why Ruth is holding on to her so tightly, she begins unraveling things and realizing Ruth hasn't always been honest with her.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. And there is that interesting sort of dynamic between the question of, like, is Catherine looking at her mother, who's the person closest to her in the world? Like you said, they really are so isolated from one another. I mean, from the world, just the two of them. And the question becomes like, is the story that my mother told me a lie to protect her or to protect me? You know what I mean? So it's this question of, like, when you come to terms with the fact that the person you think you know the best in the world maybe isn't who you thought they were, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially in the sense that if that's a parent, it is really unnerving. It's and I love the fact that Catherine works with this in this memory care unit, right? I mean, did you do a lot of research for that, because it feels so genuine?
Oh, thank you. I did. I like to research my books. I'm a former reporter. So
Yes.
part of the fun for me is getting to interview people, getting to see different things, getting to kind of walk in those shoes. So I did, a fair amount of reading, and I spoke to a lot of people, and I went online and, read a lot, and, got into different like chat groups where I could observe what people were saying who were caring for family members with Alzheimer's. And I felt that was really important to get right, and
Yeah.
to also really show that, the people in this memory care unit, I wanted to show bits of who they were before they arrived, and that they had these full, complicated, loving,
Right.
wonderful, bad lives like we all do. And then when they are in the memory care unit, they're seen as more of a shell, but that part of them is still in there. It's kind of, I think I
Yeah.
described it as like, that trick soap that, sometimes we would get for our kids that would have like a little toy figure inside all the layers of glycerin that you could see, and it was kind of
Yep.
gauzy.
Yeah.
Couldn't get to it. And that was the feeling that Catherine and her coworkers had about the people that they cared for.
Yeah. And I mean, it is the idea also of sort of like when we lose identity, right? And how scary that is, to be an adult who loses identity, and then also to be the child of, or the spouse of somebody who's losing their identity, and how, that really rocks it. Well, I thought that part was really well done, and a beautiful compliment to the sort of questions of what Ruth is going through, and what Catherine's going through. And I think this is a sort of thing for you, right? You oftentimes, I mean, it's interesting that this book really does explore sort of love and marriage, or, these relationships. They're not that Catherine and James were married, or sorry, Ruth and James were married, but the idea that of these, like, relationships where we create, children or fall in love. And that's a thing for you a little bit, because we also learn a lot about Ruth's father, who
Mhm.
sounds like a lovely man, and Ruth's mother, was harder. Um, so this is, and somehow you manage to make these questions and these relationships fresh every time. So, can you talk about sort of why that interests you?
Oh, well, first of all,
You
thank
know,
you so much. That's a huge compliment. And I'm so happy, Daniel, because I feel like you got exactly what I've been trying to do, which is um, almost blend a bit of my previous genre that I wrote 8 books in, which was women's fiction, character driven, but, also plot driven, but really developing the characters and relationships. And now that I'm
Yeah.
writing thrillers and I switch
Yeah.
genres, I want to bring that in too. I want you to deeply understand the characters, and maybe you don't agree with what they're doing, but at least you kind of understand them. And I want to
Absolutely.
play on the emotions. I hope I can get a tear out of you at the end. I hope that you'll feel all the things when you're reading, one of my books. So thank you for pointing that out, because that was something I really wanted to do, and I'm so glad you got that.
And I think that in all of your books, I think there's a lot of universality, even if we're, again, in a thriller novel, I think we reread them, and we read partially for escape, which, is so lovely. And it's why I'm such a, huge fan of the genre myself. I mean, I read, voraciously, obviously for the podcast, but also, otherwise. And I do think, the whole idea of, the way that we are in a relationship and the ways we fall in love and out of love, and then the ways that we, don't necessarily recognize the person that we fell in love with at certain moments. That feels really universal, even if the examples are, very benign for most of us. Like, you see somebody lose their temper and think, that doesn't sound like you, or, they do something that seems out of character. But I think it's something we all have, we're all dealing with all the time, right? Relationships between, if it's not our romantic relationship, it's the romantic relationship of our parents or our children, or, it is so, so interesting. So, okay, now let's talk about process, because I did spot that whiteboard. And, I kind of, so the obvious sort of starter question is, pantser plot, pantser or a plotter, although I think those are sort of generalities. How do you write?
Yeah. So my process has evolved quite a bit, because Gone Tonight is my 13th published book. So it's really
Congratulations.
changed. Thank you. So now what I do is I start with a synopsis. So it takes a while to get the idea. You're kind of gathering. I rarely have lightning bolt, fully formed ideas come to
Right.
me.
That would be
But
nice, right?
that would be if we could all be J.K. Rowling and be like sitting on the subway and just get Harry Potter delivered. That would be lovely, right into our brains. But yeah, so I'll start working the idea. And so what I do right now is I write a synopsis. My current one is about 4.5 pages, and I will send that to my editor. And I've already pitched her the idea over the phone, and she's, given me the approval. So I want to write a synopsis, even though I used to hate writing them. I
Yeah.
would much rather write like a 400-page book than a 4-page synopsis. I'm like, I got to figure it out when I'm in it. I don't, have that kind of bird's eye view of the landscape yet. I got to get in there and work on it. But what I realized was that I would actually be saving myself a lot of time, not only by thinking it out ahead of time, but by making sure my editor didn't read it and say, oh, I have another book that has this exact same plot twist, or, whatever it was. No, I hate this part.
Right.
You change this. So it's better to get all the big things worked out ahead of
Yeah.
time. So I write the synopsis, I send it to her, and then I generally write a couple chapters and send them to her and say, this is the tone, this is where I'm going with this. What do you think? And she'll say, keep going. And then I'll write the whole book before I send it to her, because editors really only have a set number of reads in them. If you think about
Yes.
like how many,
Mhm.
if you read something and over, you lose the ability to critique it. It's just too familiar to you. So I want to give her the best first version that I can, so that she can, bring her best editing trick bag to it. So I'll have other people read my first draft. I have some wild beta readers. One of them is a professional NBA player named yeah, I know, Fee Nafisa Collier. She played for UConn. She's amazing, and she posted on Instagram about one of my books years ago. And I ended up doing like an Instagram live with her and chatting. And she is so smart, such a reader. She said she's the one in the locker room before every game reading. She's just this voracious reader. I
That's
said,
so
would you mind?
awesome.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? So I said, do you
So
mind if I
crazy.
send you a draft of my new book? And she's like, great. So now she's one of my regular beta readers.
I love it.
And you just never know where you're going to find a great beta reader. There's some
Right.
people who just can give you that good feedback. So I have a handful. I have my agent, my boyfriend goes through everything, multiple times.
Right.
My editor gets it. And then she'll give me her, critique letter, and I
Yeah.
revise, and then that's it. Yeah.
So talk about, because I am actually, and I would love to be more efficient, because I am the person who thinks, oh, I can only write it. I can only, know what's going on when I'm in the middle of the book. And so I do have the tendency to write and then end up off in the stratosphere at some point and have to cut, 15, 20,000 words, which is super not fun, as you, I'm sure, have experienced. But so, when you're in that synopsis phase, how do you, without being in it, how do you find yourself able to sort of figure out where the book is going? That's the trick for me, right? How are you doing that if you're not writing it?
Right. And that, I think, is just something that you just have to keep practicing.
Mhm.
And I think I probably, wrote a few horrible synopses early on, but as I began to do it more, it's one of these things, like everything in writing, that it's just a craft. And
Mhm.
so, I would talk about the idea with people. I talked about it with, my boyfriend, my beta reader, and people would, throw out questions, things like that, to help me develop it a bit more. Um, I'd write it, I'd set it aside. I do all the things they tell you to do with the book: set it aside a few days, come back to it. I mean, I think, probably what you struggle with, like I do, is like, how do you know if the synopsis, like, how close are you going to stick to that?
Mhm.
Is that really going to be an idea worth 400 pages? Like, and so I do veer
Yeah.
off from it sometimes.
Yeah.
This last book stuck to it pretty closely.
So you kind of, in the synopsis, you give sort of the twists and the ending, the whole thing. You're sort of basically writing a sort of you're an outline, but it's fuller. It's got full sentences, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yes, it's paragraphs. So, similar to, the back of a book, the copy that you read on the
Mhm.
back, like, Danielle woke up today, at 8 a.m. and, the moon had fallen out of the sky, whatever it is,
Right.
things like that, right? Where
Right.
it's
Right.
in a
Right.
very conversational tone, but I also try to make it compelling and
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, and one other piece, because you had mentioned the whiteboard. So, what I do with my
Yes.
whiteboard, so I have two. My fantasy is to have my whole room covered with whiteboards. I would love nothing more. I like messy, creative chaos.
I love it.
But every time I write a chapter, I write, a few words outlining what happened in that chapter. Like, Beth went to the store and ran into her ex, right? So that might be one line. And I do that throughout the entire book so that I can kind of look and just see where the book is going, where I
Right.
break it into different acts. And my bottom whiteboard is where I am putting things like, here are the four themes I want to explore. Here are the four big, plot, intersection, points. And so I'll write like kind of more general things all over the bottom. But with the top, I think a trick that I learned a while ago, when I was actually first starting to write books, was I would take novels that I admired and I would read them again, but I would take a little sticky note. And for every chapter, I would write a line or two of what happened in that chapter and that scene. And I would put it up on the wall. And by the time I'd finished the book, I had the entire outline of the book. And
Hmm.
that really helped me figure out structure of novels.
That's funny. I do that actually. I did that for a lot of books in like a spreadsheet, because I spent years in
Hmm.
finance. So for me, the spreadsheet was easier, but I would color code it by point of view. And then at the end, I would show the, where the stakes increased or there was a twist. And it is really useful for those people who are, thinking about wanting to write a book. It does really give you, however you want to do it, it gives you this view of the book in totality and with sort of on one page, and helps you understand how a book works.
Oh, I love the idea of a spreadsheet and different colors and different, like, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I've done that for, I did it for a dozen or so books, as I was trying to figure out, and not just like before my first book, but in between books, and trying to figure out sort of how I want something to be structured, especially when you find a book that you feel like, oh, the structure of this reminds me of what I'm trying to accomplish. And so then it's a really nice tool. There's nothing similar about the books, obviously, because that's just the way it goes, but it gives you this thing to be like, oh, okay, so here she raises the stakes, and here's where he puts in that twist. And I think that's really clever. I love the idea of doing it for your own book, and I have done that for a spreadsheet in a spreadsheet for mine. But then around chapter 8 or 9, I get sidetracked by the fact that I'm writing and I forget this to keep doing it. But I do, I love the idea of writing out a synopsis, and I do have that as a goal to be a little bit more, a little bit more just organized and thoughtful. And as you said, writing a whole book is a real risk without getting it approved ahead of time, right? I mean, it takes a long time to write a book, and if your editor doesn't love it, then that's
Yeah.
not fun. And we've all been there too. So is there, now you write full time, obviously, I assume, and your kids are more or less grown?
So I have 2 in college. One just graduated, one's in college, and I have one who's going into high school. So
Okay. So you've got a straggler.
yeah.
I love it. Well, so obviously, when you've got sort of this sort of traditional life of a mom with kids in school. And so do you sort of tell us about your schedule? Obviously, you're probably writing while he's at school, but do you have are you a first up in the morning kind of person? What works best for you?
Well, when my kids were young, so when I was first starting to try to write fiction, my boys were like, 0 and 2. I had 2 within 2 years. And so I would write wherever and whenever I could. Like, I didn't have much time at all. And I would write, like, if they were asleep in the car, I'd pull over and be scribbling. It was like any stolen hour I could get, or half hour, because I never really napped.
Yes.
At Chuck E. Cheese, I brought my laptop into Chuck E. Cheese when they were a little older, because Chuck E. Cheese is like the most secure place in the world. They stamp the kids, they stamp your hand. I could watch them. I'd be typing. Like, I was just desperate to try to, write wherever I could.
Yeah.
But then, sold a few books. I was able to structure it around their school day, and then sometimes, later at night. But right now, the past couple books, I've been loving early mornings, like 4 to 5 a.m. I'll get up. And for some reason, that's like my golden time to write. I don't know if it's the coffee, the quiet house, the uncluttered brain, but I'll get, a half day's work done by 9, take a little break, and then I'll hit it again in the afternoon. And so
that isn't, I always think that is so impressive. I'm like, where's the gene that would have me up at that hour? It completely missed me. Yeah, no, I do not. I'm like, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I am rolling over. So do you find you go to bed really early? You must go to bed early.
I do. I go to bed early. I go to bed by 10 every night. Yeah.
Well,
I
that's
love
not
my sleep.
bad.
And
That's
I
not
don't
bad
always get up
early.
at 4. Yeah. And I don't always get up at 4. It can be 5, it can be 5:30, but it is as early as 4. It's just kind of when I wake up naturally, and
wow.
I'm myself ready to write when I'm writing. Yeah.
I love that.
With Gone Tonight, it was weird because for the first time, I dreamed I was inside scenes of the book. Like, I was having a conversation with Catherine, and she was showing me around the memory ward in this one certain room where family members stay. And I'm like, oh, this looks just like I imagined it. And that was crazy.
That is so crazy. And you use that in your book. I remember the room where the family members stay.
Yeah.
So that is really, God, how helpful, right? And I do think I don't know if you're somebody who keeps like a notepad by your bed, but I do think that there's some magic that happens, either right before you're falling asleep or in dreams. And if you are, if we're smart, I had this the other night. I'm starting a new book, and I had this great thing that came to my mind, and I didn't get up and write it down. And that's the thing is, it's just then in the next morning, it's like it's gone. It'll be. I'm sure it'll be replaced by something as good or better. But you know what I mean. You have to get up and sort of capture it.
Well, do you ever like just type it into your phone and send it to yourself in the middle of the night or late at
I
night?
do. I actually talk, and my husband hates this, but I sort of like sometimes get up and whisper, and just do talk to text and send myself an email. But yes, I do that. And I think that's a really good way, even a voice memo or typing or whatever works. I think you have to capture that. But I've also been known to just like have, write in the dark, which is funny because you wake up and all the lines kind of cross each other and it's hard to read what you wrote. But I can usually kind of get the gist of what I was trying to say. But there's some magic that happens that I think you have to capture, right?
I love the idea of your husband waking up and you're muttering into your phone, "Kill him with a knife." And
right.
and he's like, oh, God, what have I gotten myself into?
It's right. Well, it's smart of them to sleep with one eye open. But So now that you're 13 books, you're working on your 14th, I'm sure. How do you feel when you start a new book? Because I'm always curious. Is there a point where we get like, oh, I've done this enough, I know what I'm doing, or is the fear? So tell us about that. Yeah.
No, I mean, I always feel like, oh my God, how could I possibly write another book? I mean, do you feel that way? Like, what?
Every time.
No, this is crazy. Like, I will not be able to write another book. And then you start writing it, you get really into it. But because we're writers, we're not all that confident and a little bit
Right.
neurotic at times, right? So then it's like, oh, this is horrible. Like this, I
Right.
cannot trust anybody. This is not working. It's boring. It's slow. You have no perspective. I mean, you just go through all the emotions with the
Yeah.
books.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is right. And I don't know that it ever goes away. I had a really lovely interview with Sandra Brown, and she said same thing. She said, every
Wow.
time I start a book, I look and I have to look at my bookshelf and say, okay, Sandra, you've done this before. You can do this again. I think, well, if she hasn't gotten to the point where
Wow.
she feels like it's, where she still feels the fear, then I think maybe we're just destined to feel it forever.
Probably. And maybe that's a good thing. Like
I,
maybe we, if we were like, oh yeah, we got this, we wouldn't put the angst and the energy into the book, right?
I do think that's right. I think there's something that you kind of have to feel that fear so that you work hard enough to make the book the best it can be.
Yeah.
So, okay, so Gone Tonight comes out on the tell me.
August 1st?
August 1st. I love that. That's so exciting. I love
So
this.
soon.
250,000 copy announced market distribution. You go, girl. I love this. This is a huge book. So can you tell us, and this is like, I think this is the meanest thing to do to authors. It's like, we're celebrating this fabulous book that you have that's coming out. It's not even yet in the world. And then we're like, okay, what are you working on now? Because we always, of course, want to know what's the next thing coming.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm actually okay with answering that because the next one's done and my editors accepted it. So it knock on wood. So the next book is that one was, so Gone Tonight was a gift. Like that was, I think every writer has one of these books where you write quickly and fluidly. And Gone Tonight I wrote in 4.5 months, which has never happened to me before. It didn't need a lot of editing. It was just a joy, except for the moments when I was convinced it was horrible and I should not write. Of course, every other day.
Right.
Next book, I decided to do a departure and write the entire book from one point of view. And traditionally, I really like 2 points of view because you can bounce. Do you do that too? Like prefer 2 or 3? You can bounce back and forth, see the characters the way other people see them, have them in all kinds of environments. But I thought, for this book, I can't think of a good secondary character who would be as strong as my protagonist. I'm going to have to do it all from her point of view. And it was hard. I definitely was like, all the tricks that I had to leave somebody at a cliffhanger and pick somebody up here. Like I couldn't do any of that, and trying to keep up the tension with it. So that one took a lot more work, but I'm glad I did it because I feel like it helped me learn more and grow more as a writer. And I was happy with it. And my editor was happy with it, more importantly.
Right.
But that one's done, and that one is about a lawyer who has a very interesting, unusual expertise in the DC area, and what happens when she goes to represent an unusual client.
I love that. Well, I do, it's so funny that you say that because I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs. They're obviously reacting to something going on in the street. But I actually did this, I've always done multiple points of view. The one thing I love about it too is that the cliffhangers become very natural because you can leave us in the middle of a sort of scene with somebody and then go to another person, which sort of drives a natural momentum, right? To, oh God, we got to, get through, find out what's going on with this person. And then you leave a hook with that person, go back to the other person. It's sort of this natural. And I just also finished, for the first time ever, a single point of view. And I'm like you, I have 16 books out. It's the first single point of view I've ever done. And it was really interesting and different. And I'm also glad I did it. It is a different kind of beast, isn't it? It's a really, and you'd think, oh, it's not the different. Yeah, I think I might do it again. But it has to be the right story. And I think to your point, I had the same experience, which is there's just nobody else. There's nobody else whose point of view felt like it could compete with her point of view. or even like, or balance it, or compliment it. It was just her story. And so I
Yeah.
think that was the only choice. It's the first time I realized how the truth of it, sometimes the story commands a certain structure, right? That is
Yeah.
exactly sort of my experience. And I never done it before, but I enjoyed it. I don't know that I'll do it next again.
I feel the same way.
Um,
I'm like, I want to go back to the 2 for the next one and just
right.
make it a little easier on myself, although who knows?
Exactly. It is interesting, right? Yeah. But I think that's so funny because I just did it too. And I do think it is a very different experience. And I'm glad I did it, but it is harder. It was harder,
Yeah.
I
Did it
thought.
take you longer to write the
Well,
one
this one
you
was
wanted?
this might have been my story that was sort of like yours. This was sort of a fever dream story for me, and it did kind of happen fast. It wasn't so much that it took longer, is that I felt like the chapters were longer because there wasn't this natural, like, I'm leaving her in this place to go to somebody else. I don't know. It felt different and harder. Um, and then also sort of weirdly fast.
Mhm.
But anyway, but it is interesting. I find that it's an interesting experience when you think you're doing something, similar to what you've always done, and yet it feels so different. And
Right.
but that's really exciting. Do you have a title for that? I know sometimes they change a million times between.
The tentative title is House of Glass, but I don't know
Okay.
if it will
Yeah,
stick, you know.
I know. That's so funny. The world of these. Okay, well, our interview actually is going to go live. I'm checking on July 27th. So when you're listening to this right now, you have just like 4 days before Sarah's book is on the shelves, which means you can go and grab it. Sarah, tell our listeners where to find you in the world of social media, your website, all that good stuff, so they can grab this book before it's on the shelves.
Awesome. Well, my website is just my name, sarahpekkanen.com. The last name's a little tricky to spell. And then but I mean, one nice thing about having an unusual last name is that's my handle on everything. Instagram, I have an author page on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter much, but I'm on there, and I'm sort of new to TikTok and trying to figure that out
I
and having so
know.
much fun watching everybody else's videos. But yeah,
Yes.
I love, and you probably feel this way too. Like, I love going on social media and just seeing something nice posted by a reader, or like getting
Yeah.
to comment on something, because what we do is so solitary. We're just here alone, staring at our screens all day, making stuff up, beating ourselves up. And then you go on like Instagram and somebody's like, oh, I read this book and I really liked it. And it makes your day.
It
So
really
yeah,
does. And I think that's right. And I think we'd love to hear from readers who enjoy your stories. If you're a reader who didn't enjoy a story, I think you just let that go, because we have enough criticism going on between our own ears. We don't really need yours. But I agree. And actually the world of authors is so supportive, and the love we get from other authors it's so vital to sort of the mental survival of this job, which is really hard, and it is really lonely. And yet it's also, I can't imagine doing anything else, and I'm sure you can't either. I'm going to spell for our listeners. I'm going to spell Pekkanen because it is a little tricky. Although I think you could probably mess it up and Google would figure it out because it's so unusual. Sarah is with an H, and Pekkanen is Pekkanen. And so you can find Sarah, it sounds like, everywhere. I'm like Sarah, just barely on Twitter, but and I see you all the time, mostly on Instagram, which is where I spend most of my time. But grab Gone Tonight. You're gonna really love this story, and the twists go all the way to the very, very, very end, which I think is such a talent. So thank you so much for joining
oh,
us,
this is
Sarah.
great. Thank you so much for having me, Danielle.
Absolutely,
And I'll talk to you soon,
everybody.
I hope.
Oh, I hope so too. Are you going to VoucherCon?
I don't think so this year, but I'll be at Thriller Fest next year. So maybe we can grab a drink.
Oh, I would love that. Absolutely. Well, it can't come fast enough. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today on Killer Women with Sarah Pekkanen, whose new book, Gone Tonight, is fabulous. Go grab your copy, and we will see you next time. Bye.